Resilience isn't just something about me pulling myself up by my bootstraps, or I just have to be so strong. That resilience is actually much more about flexibility and adaptability and access to resources. In terms of like what helps me recover from adversity, do I have someone that I can reach out to? Are there sources of safety that I can connect into? Do I know where to reach when I'm struggling so that I feel less alone in the world?
Hey friends, welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. If you're looking for compassionate conversations and practical resources for recovery from and safeguarding against spiritual abuse, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Brian Lee. I'm an ordained pastor and spiritual abuse survivor, and I know what it feels like navigating life after spiritual abuse. I also know what it's like to want to prevent anything from happening to the people you know and love. It's why Broken to Beloved exists. Today, we are talking with Dr. Arielle Schwartz about polyvagal theory and how we make it practical. Dr. Schwartz is a licensed psychologist and leading voice in the healing of trauma. She is an internationally sought-out teacher and author of 8 books, including the most recent Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma. As the founder of the Center for Resilience-Informed Therapy, she offers a mind-body approach to therapy for trauma and informational mental health and wellness updates through her writing, public speaking, social media presence, and blog. She believes that the journey of trauma recovery is an awakening of the spiritual heart. Friends, this conversation was so helpful to me. And so here is our conversation with our new friend, Arielle. Dr. Schwartz, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brian. I'm really looking forward to this topic and to our conversation today. I've been curious about having this conversation with you and kind of knowing that it's going to be rich.
Yes, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. You've been doing work obviously around trauma and recovery, but also around polyvagal theory for such a long time now. It's something I recently came across in the last maybe 3 or 4 years. What first got you interested in doing this kind of work with polyvagal theory?
So I've been in the field of trauma recovery and a somatic approach to trauma recovery for about 30 years. And I think for me, looking at the body-brain connection has brought me into kind of looking through the lens of neuroscience, maybe more broadly speaking, and looking at a specific area of the field that's called interpersonal neurobiology. So basically looking at what is happening inside of the physiology of one person and how basically our nervous systems are not quite so distinct from each other, but that we're highly responsive to each other's cues of safety or cues of threat or how you're feeling emotionally and how that might impact me to be close to you and vice versa. And so when we're looking at this field of interpersonal neurobiology, one of the kind of subcategories of that is the work of Dr. Stephen Porges in applied polyvagal theory.
It's all of that is fascinating to me. I'm afraid we've lost a bunch of people just in case, because I love interpersonal neurobiology. I've read a lot of Kurt Thompson's work, Deb Dana, and the cues of safety, cues of threat, or cues of danger. Interpersonal neurobiology, and I love the way that you just defined that for us, because I think that does help us. It's like the way that we interact with each other, the connections or disconnections that we experience with each other and through each other change both of us, right? Mm-hmm. And I love the idea of the brain-body connection, because I think specifically in the world of spiritual abuse, or just in the world of spirituality and religion, there is so much agency that we give away to people who we perceive as authority figures. And then we're told more, depending on your denomination or faith background, some more than others, that your body is bad and that only your spirit is good. So you should just ignore or dismiss what's happening in your body. And then a lot of people end up experiencing abuse because of that dynamic. They're kind of primed and made ready for that kind of thing to take over, right? So help us understand how that brain-body connection works, maybe why it's so important for people who are having a hard time kind of reconciling those things when they've been taught one thing for so long.
Yeah, right. Like this idea that somehow the body is a source of sin, or that the body is something that we have to learn how to override and overcome, and urges and so on and so forth. And it becomes this very, very dangerous setup, as you
Hmm.
said, right? Because if I have to push away the instinctual knowing that lives inside of my felt sense, right? And then where do I put my decision making, or as you said, kind of sense of agency, or kind of location of truth? I have to locate that outside of me if I can't locate that inside of me. When we look at the brain body connection, one of the things that we learn is that the felt sense in the body is actually incredibly intelligent. And it helps us with everything from emotional regulation and decision making, and sorting out safety or lack of safety in relationships. Those cues of whether or not I feel safe with you live in here. They live inside of whether I feel relaxed in my body and easeful, or whether I feel tense, or my breath is restricted, or I've got a tightening in my diaphragm or my belly, like all of those ways that our body says, something doesn't feel right. And if I
Mm.
have to ignore that for the sake of, well, somebody else told me that that person is safe, or somebody else told me that they know what's true, again, it becomes a deep vulnerability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's that continued surrender of agency, and or that continued repressing of our gut instincts saying, hey, something feels off here, but I want to be right. I want to be doing the holy thing or the biblical thing, or however we end up defining it or putting words to it, right? And in that process, I think it sets up for us this cycle of really what is harm to our own bodies. And I think in the same way, if we're three brained beings with our head, our feelings, our heart, and our gut, we're also told that emotions are bad. You should, people often quote this idea that the heart is deceitful above all things. So you should just ignore your feelings and just do what we're telling you. I want to kind of jump, but this is very related to the idea of complex PTSD.
Mhm.
Because I think in many instances of spiritual abuse, certainly there are things like clergy sexual abuse, which are certainly defined events. But I think most people who I've talked to in this space are coming with this long history of little things that have been accumulating over time. And it also makes sense because I have a diagnosis of CPTSD from my therapist. And I think a lot of people don't have access to that, or just are afraid to receive that, which makes sense because there's so much stigma around it. Would you help us understand the nature of complex PTSD?
Yeah. And in your question, you gave a bit of the definition, so I'm going to just
Hmm.
name that back, which is that the complex PTSD, rather than being a single incident or sometimes a very glaring event, is often the result of the accumulated, repeated, chronic dynamics that happen, and in which maybe there's kind of an ongoing experience of not feeling safe or not knowing what I can trust. Maybe there's all of these accumulations of smaller betrayals. And the way that CPTSD impacts us is that it can lead to a difficulty in kind of knowing who to trust, or knowing what feels real to me, because it's been skewed, or it's been, I don't know, maybe kind of contaminated by this ongoing relational dynamic that then impairs my overall sense of self, or my own sense of identity. So rather than saying, like, this is who I am, and then this one challenging thing happened, let's say it was a car accident, or it was a fire, or it was a flood, or it was an act of violence, but I know who I am, and I just have to sort out who I am in relationship to that event. When we're talking about CPTSD, what we're talking about are events that basically kind of weave their way into, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
So I am not distinct from the trauma that I lived through.
Hmm.
That's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah. And I think that's what I hear so often from people in this community, is that their identity got wrapped up in all of that. So that when there's a loss, or when the final event happens, it's like, okay, I don't think I can do this anymore. Identity, core beliefs, questions about all the relationships and connections with myself, with others, with God, all come crashing down.
Yeah.
And so when we're there in that spot, completely dysregulated, I think in what we would define as like this dorsal vagal state, right at the bottom of the ladder, where do we start and how do we climb back up?
I want to slow things down just in case we have listeners that are like, what the heck did he just say? What do you mean by
Yeah.
dorsal vagal state, right? It's kind of like what you said earlier, like the language of interpersonal neurobiology or the language of applied polyvagal theory is very valuable language, but so long as we have a roadmap around it.
Yes, please.
So yeah, so let's kind of give a little bit of that mapping. When we look at the polyvagal theory, even just the word polyvagal, what that word breaks down to is poly meaning multiple, vagal being vagus nerve circuits or kind of multiple presentations of the vagus nerve. And ideally, with our nervous system, especially the part of the nervous system that functions on our behalf, it's like our built in stress response system that's called the autonomic nervous system. And that autonomic nervous system has two primary branches. One of those branches is to bring us into action. We call it the sympathetic nervous system. And in the context of threat, that lets us fight or flee from danger. And then we also have a parasympathetic nervous system, and that's the rest and digest system, ideally. But what you just named, and this is where polyvagal theory really illuminates more nuanced understanding of this dichotomous autonomic nervous system, is that sometimes rather than going into stillness and finding a sense of rest or sleeping well, what happens instead is that when I go into stillness, I feel collapsed, fatigued, no agency, no sense of choice, powerless, helpless to change my circumstances. That can, over time, lead me to feel kind of despairing or even a deep sense of shame, though it's wrong with me that I can't take action. And so that sometimes gets kind of loosely termed a dorsal vagal state, but it's a really referring to a much more primitive and self-protective mechanism of that parasympathetic nervous system that's driven by the vagus nerve that says when we can't escape danger, when no matter what we do, it's not going to make a difference, that we start to feel more of an overarching experience of powerlessness and helplessness. And then, like, the question is, well, so if we are in that shutdown, and I think
Mhm.
that's where you were going with your question, like, what can we do? How do we find our way back out of that? And we've already been like actually kind of putting a few little like stepping stones or markers of what that looks like. You used the word agency, which basically means that I have choices available to me now that maybe I didn't have then. I can choose what to think. I can choose what to believe. I can reclaim a relationship with my body that's different than maybe what I was told or taught, right? So all of these smaller steps that help us feel mobilized in the world in a positive direction, that's going to help us climb up what we call the polyvagal ladder, right? Like sometimes we feel like we get kind of shut down at the bottom rung, which is that powerlessness. And we have to remobilize ourselves to climb out of that state.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I love that you say that polyvagal theory provides us with a roadmap to resilience. And I think that's what I have found. And I've done what I would consider a lot of reading around polyvagal theory and still trying to wrap my brain around some of it, right? Hoping to have an understanding of it. More than anything, one of our goals is to provide really practical resources. And so, working to take all of this intellectual knowledge around how my brain and body connect, around this vagus nerve that runs through my body, around how it affects me when I'm in shutdown or in a sympathetic state or any of these things, it's making those things usable and doable in a way that actually makes a difference. And I'm not just carrying around information in my brain, right? And I love that you also say resilience is sometimes misunderstood as solely an internal process.
Mhm.
And that when we don't feel resilient, we blame ourselves. And I think there's so much inherent shame that survivors of abuse carry because it was my fault, or I let this thing happen to me, or why did I stay for so long, or whatever it is. Or if they can't find their way out, there's more shame of like, I guess this is just who I am now. So help us understand that resilience, and then let's move to that connection to our body.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot in what you just said, and I'm going to kind of grab onto two
Mm-hmm.
pieces for now. One is that this idea that resilience isn't just something about me pulling myself up by my bootstraps, or I just have to be so strong, that resilience is actually much more about flexibility and adaptability
Mm.
and access to resources, right? So in terms of like what helps me recover from adversity, do I have someone that I can reach out to? Are there sources of safety that I can connect into? Do I know where to reach when I'm struggling so that I feel less alone in the world, right? And, when we look at the factors associated with recovering from adversity or trauma, one of those most important factors is relational experience or connection, right?
Hmm.
That I am not out here all alone trying to survive this, but that I know that there's other people that have been through something similar, and therefore I feel more understood or a greater sense of belonging. I think that's what also makes spiritual abuse really delicate, because very often people enter spiritual community to find a sense of belonging and less aloneness in the world. But
Hmm.
then that very basic human need in a way becomes the vulnerability. It becomes the thing that leads us to join and maybe bypass actually something doesn't feel right. So I'll choose belonging over
Yes.
self-protection.
Yeah. And so I also appreciate you because you talk a lot about having that sense of belonging. And like you say, we bypass our instincts in order to feel like we're belonging and having meaningful connections. And so much of what I'm reading around interpersonal neurobiology, around the process of finding healing and wholeness, is this idea of connection.
Mhm.
And yet, so many people in this space feel utterly isolated or alone because they've been cut off from their community. They've been excommunicated from their churches. They've gotten letters from their elders saying you're no longer welcome here. And so I love that you say that healthy relationships with others also require that you cultivate a compassionate relationship to yourself. And this idea that we also have to have that. And I often compare that to the scripture around the idea of that we are to love our neighbors, but as ourselves.
Mm.
And so I take that to mean if I don't know how to love myself, I don't really know how to love my neighbor. So when we've become so used to dismissing ourselves, denying ourselves, giving up agency, rights, choices, thinking in favor of belonging, how do we do what you call like holding ourselves with tenderness and kindness and self acceptance to come back to ourselves?
Yeah. So often in the applied polyvagal theory field, we talk about something called co-regulation,
Hmm.
and that co-regulation precedes what we call self-regulation. So ideally, we have opportunities to be in relationship with someone that offers us a felt sense of compassion, understanding, acceptance, a willingness to really be in relationship to us just as we are, in a very soft and kind way, right? Caring. And, ideally also we have those kinds of relationships in our earliest development, so that there are those sources of nourishment and caring and trustworthy others that help us to internalize what that feels like. And then that becomes a part of me, right? So like if I had somebody else that was very caring and accepting of me and understanding, it's almost like it's wiring that within myself so that it becomes easier for me to talk to myself in a loving voice, or to say, wow, that was a hard moment, we've got this, like whatever it is. So it becomes the internal foundation for that self-compassion. And then when I can essentially be that kind of aligned with self-compassion on the inside, I am then more able to offer that on the outside. And so it becomes this beautiful, kind of reinforcing, where I become the co-regulator for another. And then that helps them, learn how to do that for themselves. And they become a co-regulator and so forth. And then, the other piece to name about this is that if we didn't get those sources of good co-regulation in our childhood or in our upbringing, that doesn't mean that we're doomed for the rest of our lives.
Mm.
That's where having a good therapist that we feel safe and seen and understood and accepted, and other sources of that, whether that's group spaces or a good friend or a family member, But ultimately, we really do need each other to heal.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I also really appreciate that you say that co regulation can happen in many ways and doesn't always require other people.
Right.
Because we're talking about co regulation all the time. And then I hear people's like, but I have no one to co regulate with. Would you help us understand what you mean when you say it doesn't always require other people? Because I think this may be really helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I can feel how you've really pulled some pieces out of my new book, which is the Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma. And so one of the things that I speak about in there is how can we find sources of co-regulation when we literally just don't have another person right now that can serve that purpose, right? So sometimes it's with our pet, sometimes it's with nature, sometimes it's truly through spaces that you feel safe enough to move your body in, right? Like it's one of the things that for me in my work of applying polyvagal theory in yoga and as a yoga teacher, and I really would love to talk about kind of the spiritual abuse topic in relationship to yoga and why an applied polyvagal lens creates a very clean relationship.
Mm.
Yoga practice, but we'll come back to that. But what I'm, naming in terms of other sources of co-regulation is that sometimes that needs to come through a movement class, a yoga class, or going on a run outside or going to the gym. Like we can actually find ways in which moving our body, breathing, working with positive mindset, working with intentionality, as we're in relationship to ourselves, we're leaning into an outer scaffolding that helps to hold us.
I love that. I would so often consider those kinds of practices to be moving towards self regulation. And I love that you helped to reframe that. Even I think it was like last Thursday or Friday, I had a really upsetting email that I read and was way off in my body. I was like, I think I just need to go to my gym and work out for a little bit and just be
Yeah,
in a public space where I can just do my
exactly.
thing and move my body and just kind of work out the frustration and the dysregulation. And I love that you offer pets
Yeah.
as a resource of just being outside. You also talk about like drumming or dancing, or like you say, with the yoga practices. I would
Mhm.
love to hear more about that because I think yoga has been so demonized, especially in more fundamentalist circles, where some churches are so strict as to say, yeah, we'll offer it, but we're still afraid of the influence of our elders. So we're just going to call it Christian stretching. Like there's so much mental gymnastics around labels and semantics and stuff. Tell us how, because you've obviously done so much work around this, applied polyvagal and yoga and spirituality. Tell us whatever you'd like around it.
Yes, will do, will do. I actually want to kind of backtrack a little bit in a bit of a story around yoga because I grew up in a family where yoga was part of my life since I was very
Okay.
young. So I got introduced to yoga when I was 7 years old, and we would go to ashrams and we would go to different spiritual centers. So I also grew up Jewish, so just kind of knowing kind of my spiritual and religious background. And luckily and very gratefully, there was really never any misuse of power in my early experiences, either directly in relationship to Judaism or to the yogic or Hindu practices that I was involved in. But that said, one of the communities that my family would take me to when I was a child was a community called Kripalu. It's still out there as the Kripalu Center, and it's a beautiful spiritual center that actually has done a tremendous amount of healing itself. Because at one point in the 1990s, the primary spiritual leader of the center, or the guru of the center, had been called out for misuse of power in sexual domains in particular. And of course, we see this story across many, many different religions. It's not just the yogic tradition or path or the Hindu path. And the community asked that spiritual leader to leave, and they devoted a tremendous amount of time and energy to consciously attend to how is our community going to heal from this.
Hmm.
I went and did my yoga teacher training the year after he was asked to leave. And so I was immersed in the community as this healing and these ongoing conversations were happening. So a lot of what they had to learn and integrate is how do we basically adopt right use of power? How do we really locate what I'll call kind of trauma sensitive language
Mhm.
into classes and into how we teach this material so that at no point is anyone feeling like they have to do anything, right? Like this locates the language of choice everywhere.
Yeah.
And the other part about this is that looking at the science of applied polyvagal theory in yoga, what we start to study is the science of the breath and why the breath might help you to feel more relaxed or calm or uplifted or energized or joyful, right? We look at the science of fascia and connective tissue and movement and how when we move our bodies, we actually can reduce experiences of chronic pain and inflammation. We look at the role of deep relaxation and how that is deeply restorative for the immune system and the digestive system and our cardiovascular system. But we're looking through the lens of science. And what's beneficial about this is that if we don't recognize that the positive outcome of the practice is because of your own physiology, then what begins to happen is I feel good after the practice. You made me feel that way. Right? And we
Hmm.
locate the origin of that positive feeling as what the other person did to make us feel that way. That becomes problematic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to talk about breath since you mentioned it, but I want to say one more thing about regulation because I loved this part of that book as well. You say regulation is a funny word, right? It's when we are regulated, we're more likely to feel calm, connected, clear headed, but it seems to imply that you have everything under control.
Mhm.
And I love the way that you reframe this for us too. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the way that I love to think about regulation is in the same way that we would be with a child who's in distress or who's upset, right?
Hmm.
And we have this child, and let's say they're really angry about something and they're having a tantrum, right? Well, if we go, and this is true for a child, and it's just as much true for our spouses or for our good friends, right? If we go to someone who's really upset and we say, calm down, right? What's gonna happen? "Don't
Yep.
you tell me to calm down," or that tantrum is just gonna get louder, right? And so what we really need to do in order to find again, we have the word co-regulation here once again, is like, what that really means is how do we come in with a depth of compassionate understanding of what that big feeling is about? And how do we support the big feeling so that it doesn't have to roll over and create harm, right? You're really struggling. You're really mad about that. Let's, if it's a kid, maybe we just need to like put on angry music and stomp around the living room and do an angry dance, right? Like when we meet the mood, when we meet someone where they're at and where they feel not judged, when they don't feel like they're going to get punished, right? What begins to happen is that I feel safer with this big, messy feeling. And because I
Hmm.
feel safer, the big messy feeling becomes more manageable and it becomes more wisely held. Like we can look in together and find that part that's really angry or that's really sad or that's really afraid, and that we can really attend to where did that come from? Why is that present for you? Rather than judge it.
Yeah. I have a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old, so I'm rethinking all of my parenting strategies now. Well, I love that it leads with compassion and curiosity, right? Because we are so quick and easy to jump to judgment or to fixing something or correcting something or thinking we have the illusion of control. So as we look at the physical and the body work and the breathing, you have one quote that I love. It's while it's true that our bodies carry our wounds, healing doesn't require that you consistently confront your pain.
Mhm.
Instead, healing invites you to recognize that you can be in charge of where you focus your attention. So, my question is how important is it to know why my body feels dysregulated when I'm doing the work versus just recognizing that it is and just doing the work?
Yeah. Yeah. Really powerful question. I think that sometimes we get a very clear why, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
have a very specific memory that's connected to this feeling in my body or that's connected to this emotion, and I can work with that. But sometimes we have no idea why, right?
Yeah.
And it's very freeing to know that we can still heal even if we don't know why we feel the way we do. That just means that we're going to attend to what's present in the moment. That, again, big, messy feeling, right? And what does that need from me right now? What would help me feel a little bit safer, a little bit more connected? And here's the other part of the answer to your question, which is let's say we do know why. A lot of the problems with traditional psychotherapies is that they get so focused on the why that they forget about the what. What can we
Mm.
do to heal? What can we do to feel just a little bit more grounded or a little bit more centered or a little bit more empowered in this moment? And so if we continue to try and go down the trail of all of the whys, right? We lose that ability to actually pay attention in the present moment, in the here and now, to the state of my nervous system and what would help me feel more present.
I love it. So, vagus nerve, if I'm getting it right, I think kind of starts at the base of our brain, runs all the way down, up through our face, down all the way through our internal organs. And you say that breath is kind of one of the fastest ways to cultivate balance. So, why is breathing so helpful? What are some practical things? You offer so many exercises in the workbook that I love, because you also say it's like sometimes for people with a history of trauma, breathing is not the way to go. Help us
Yes.
to kind of connect to that and make sense of it.
Yes. Right. So breath may or may not feel immediately like a resource, but what breath has the potential to do, and the beautiful thing about doing any form of conscious breathing is that there are a wide range of different breath practices, and some might
Mm-hmm.
feel accessible and some might not. Um, but when we look at the breath is a beautiful mirror for our autonomic nervous system. And so every inhalation is going to bring in a little bit of more sympathetic presence, and every exhalation a little bit more parasympathetic. But then this brings in a really key question. What is optimal nervous system balance or optimal nervous system functioning? And that is the balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic. It's not always being in the parasympathetic calm. A healthy balance of our nervous system that supports the basis of resilience and adaptability and flexibility, as we spoke about before, that is this ability to move pretty seamlessly and smoothly between states of sympathetic and states of parasympathetic, or states of feeling mobilized, energized, ready to greet the day, and being able to come back and rest and sleep well at night and relax and digest my food and all of that. We need both, and we need both throughout the day, as well as, we have a circadian rhythm and sleep wake cycles and all of that. So the breath does this for us, right? If every inhalation brings a little bit more mobilization and every exhalation a little bit more immobilization and rest, then breathing rhythmically starts to set healthy tone of the autonomic nervous system, or simply put, we call it healthy vagal tone, right? And breath is one of many ways to bring in that healthy vagal tone. It's not the only one. So if again you're going, oh, every time I pay attention to my breath, I feel anxious, there's other pathways to that regulated or optimal vagal tone.
Yeah.
I know your next question. You're like, what are they?
Well, no, I
Right.
think because you talk about balancing on a bicycle, right? I think with
Right.
pedals, like one's got to be moving. You're kind of going back and forth between the two. Would
That's
you be
right.
willing to kind of just choose one of those breathing exercises just to
Oh,
help
sure.
people understand what does that look like? What does that feel like?
Yeah, yeah. The breathing practice actually that I'm gonna go into, that to me is one of my most favorites, because it balances on many different levels, and it's alternate nostril breathing. It's
Okay.
very simple. It's very accessible. You don't need any extra equipment for it. You use your hand though, and you use your hand to block off alternating nostrils. Before I guide you through it, I just want to name that what I love about this particular breath is that Not only is it a rhythmic inhale and exhale, so right there, we're bringing in the rhythm to tone the autonomic nervous system, but we're also alternating between the two nostrils. Now, the nostrils have been linked in yogic science and then more recent research that backs this up to different nervous system states. So, for example, if we're inhaling and exhaling through the left nostril, it's more calming. And if we're inhaling and exhaling through the right nostril, it's more energizing.
Huh.
I know. It's kind of fascinating. There's
It
some
is.
really, really beautiful research on this. And in fact, our nostrils will alternate throughout the day. So if you really start to pay attention to it, and you can even do this right now, of just notice which of your nostrils is freer and easier to breathe through and which is just a little bit more congested, right? Yeah. So your which were you pointing to?
My right feels freer.
Yeah. I'm like filling out mine. Right. Sometimes you have to test it out. I'm like, both of mine feel a little clogged.
Tis the season.
That's okay. You know, yeah, 'tis the season, exactly. And and then we'll notice it. We'll recheck at the end, because sometimes what we accomplish at the end of this breath is that the whole channel feels clear. It's literally often referred to as a channel clearing breath. Right? That there is a way in which we're kind of opening up. And then the last piece that I'll name about the science of the breath, and then we'll do the breath, is that there's some really beautiful literature out there about left and right sides of the brain. And that when we are kind of balancing between the two hemispheres of the brain, we get optimal brain functioning. We're basically able to kind of tap into the logic thinking brain and the emotion and kind of big picture feeling brain, and we get what we'll call wise mind. And that's that sweet spot where both hemispheres of the brain are on board at the same time. All right, you want to try it?
I would love to.
Okay, beautiful. All right. So what we'll do here is you use your right hand for this exercise, and that generally will tuck in either one or two fingers, whatever feels comfortable. I'm just going to do one. The classic mudra is two. It doesn't really matter, right? Again, you've got choice. And for anyone watching this, you do not have to do this practice. It is here for you. It is optional. It's an invitation. Take it, leave it. If it feels good, go for it, right? So that's the emphasis on choice. And whatever result you feel from this practice, it's yours. It's your gold. It's built into your body, and you're just tapping in. So with our hand, we're going to take the thumb to close off the right nostril and inhale through the left. Then we're going to turn the hand, take your fingers, close off left nostril, and exhale through the right. Inhaling right. Switching the hand, exhale left. Inhale left. Switching your hand, exhale right. Inhale right. Exhale left. Inhale left. Exhale right. Inhale right. One last time, switching your hand, exhale left. And then you might take a moment just to notice how that feels. You might also recheck your nostrils. Now I'm much more open on the left. All right. And again, sometimes it opens up both, however it works for you. But what did you notice, Brian?
There was a sense of just washing away all the anxiety and overwhelm that I've been carrying, both in my thoughts and in my body.
Mhm.
I've had a lot of stuff and just that I'm carrying phone calls, emails, situations, whatever it is. And just
Yeah.
I'm practicing other breathing practices in my brain doing this. It's like, I wonder how this is different, how this is the same. And just that left right thing is completely different. And I love it. But there was such a sense, I don't know that I want to call it groundedness, even though it was that, but I think it was just this sense of release of stuff that I know I've been carrying. And it's funny because I'll teach breathing practices to people that we're working with. And same, I'm practicing it with them. But there was something different about it with having that switching motion that just felt so good. Thank you for
Yeah.
doing that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. It felt good to me too. And as we continue to sit post practice in the last minute or so, I just again feel like this just deep calm and spaciousness and
Mm-hmm.
presence. And what I love about this breath practice is that it's predictable. Like every time, and it's true for me for most breathing practices, that when I do conscious breathing, I can feel that state shift. I can feel that letting go
Yeah.
of stress, that my mind is more present in the moment and is not hyper focusing on the email I have to send or that stressful conversation or whatever it might have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And for those who are, like you're saying, who get activated by breathing practice or by breathing too deeply or rhythmically, you also offer plenty of other practices. I love the idea of bilateral movements or of just moving your body in general. What's something else that people can use as a resource if maybe breathing isn't going to be it for them? Of whether we're going to call it the co-regulating of being outside or doing something, or whether it's a self-regulating practice they can try that involves that, like, help us understand what bilateral movement is for people who aren't familiar. And
Mhm.
then if there's one practice that you like, if you're
Yeah.
willing.
Yes, yes, for sure. For sure. So again, if we're keying into balancing between left and right hemispheres of the brain, that bilateral movement is another way to do that. And, simple practices, even something as simple as experimenting with turning your head and gaze to one side,
Mm.
coming back through center, and turning your head and gaze to the other side. Right? And while it may seem really simple, this simple practice is helping your nervous system orient to your surroundings
Mm.
and hopefully identifying that this is a safe enough time and space for your own healing and that it's okay to be here and now. And we can also take the head to center and just allow the eyes to go from left to right. And even just 20 seconds of that bilateral eye movement coming back to center, notice how your body received that.
Mm. Thank you.
Yeah. But I wanted to say that in addition to breath, in addition to bilateral movement, that there's kind of simple somatic practices that can help us tone the vagus nerve, right? Like, one of the most basic of these is that the vagus nerve comes very close to the surface of your skin. And so there's areas where the research on what we call vagus nerve stimulation uses devices, and those devices are purchasable and you can find them online, right? That are basically sending a little bit of a electrical pulse towards where the vagus nerve comes close to the surface, let's say in the sides of your neck or in the ears where there's a very high concentration of vagal fibers. And so we can use a device like that to create optimal vagal tone. But I often like to say that we have our free vagus nerve stimulation devices right here, and that even something simple like this bit of cartilage that sits in front of the ear that's called the tragus, that you can basically self massage that the tragus with a little bit of I'll call it a love pinch or a little squeeze there. And yes, you can also, if you've got your earbuds in, you can do your earlobe, right? So whatever feels comfortable and accessible. And a little bit of, we're both doing just one side, which is kind of fun because you can do one side and then just let that go and notice the two sides, right? Notice if your ears feel different, right? Very often for me, I can feel almost like there's a a temperature shift and like this draining of tension down the right side of my neck, right? So then you can even yourself out if you did just one side with us. Yeah. So there's lots of little practices. Sometimes they get referred to as like nervous system hacks or biohacking. I prefer to use the language of vagal toning or natural vagus nerve stimulation, only because hacking to me feels kind of violent.
Yeah. I love how much care and attention is paid to just paying attention.
Yeah.
Because I think so often we just want to rush through it or get to the finish line, or it's like we've heard the message of, oh, aren't you healed yet? Or aren't you over that yet? And so just taking the moment after you've breathed, after you've looked around, to just say, okay, what do you notice now? And just pay attention to what your body is sensing and feeling is so welcoming and invitational.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that. And to me, there's something about kind of an embodied approach to healing that in itself requires that we slow everything down.
Yeah.
The mind can move so much faster than our ability to sense the felt sense in our bodies. And especially if we have a history of some way or another, there being a violation of the body through abuse, often we need to progress at a nice pace towards sensing and feeling the body so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming or scary.
Yeah. There's a somatic practitioner that I spoke with years ago who I quote constantly now. I just repeat this idea is like the slower we go, the faster we heal.
Yeah.
And you talk about titration, and so many people I've talked about learn from talk about titration. And this idea, if we can just take it drop by drop at a slow pace to manage the reactions or flare-ups that come, we find ourselves in a much better place long term.
You're also reminding me of another quote, which is, I can't remember who it comes from. It's like one of those ancient Greek quotes, but maybe you'll recognize it. But it's something along the lines of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah.
And it comes back around to the value of the co-regulation and the relationship. I often describe our nervous systems in this one. I do know the quote. It's from John Donne. And he said that no man is an island, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we recognize how deeply interconnected we are, and ideally have that sense of belonging or that sense of connection within a robust field of safety, that's what lets us to essentially go far together.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll close with this idea. You say that most importantly, you don't need to wait for something to be wrong to engage with these practices. And in fact, it's more beneficial to engage in these practices on a daily basis to build that resilience to stress by enhancing your capacity to recover quickly into states of ease. So any of the practices that we've tried, and there are so many more in the workbook that I did find to be so helpful. And I think it can be tempting to try all of them. And I think, you tell me if this is good advice, just pick one and try it and see if it helps, and then just practice that one, right?
That's right.
And I think that's it. It's in preparation rather than waiting for the moment when you're in an emergency or crisis. Having these tools in your pocket, in your tool belt ahead of time helps you to rely on them much more instinctually. So thank you, Arielle, so much for this time, for these practices, for this workbook. If there's kind of one thing you would want to resource survivors with or want them to know, what would that be?
I think that it's the message that I really love to give, and it actually is something that I wrote in my very first book, which was about 10 years ago now, in the Complex PTSD workbook. But basically, just this recognition that you are not broken, right? Like sometimes we feel like we have been through, some form of crisis or another. We feel damaged, and you are not something that needs to be fixed, right? Like you are not a broken object. You are a person, you have been hurt, and you are deeply worthy of healing and taking the time that it needs to find that sense of restoration at every level of your being. So.
Thank you. We'll have links for all of your resources and everything in the show notes. Is there anything in particular you want to point people towards?
I would say that if you are not familiar with my work and my offerings out there, go to my website, which is drarielleschwartz.com. I have a second website that's resilienceinformedtherapy.com, that both of those will point you towards many of the resources that I have out there, classes on vagal toning, classes on therapeutic yoga. And I have a YouTube channel called Dr. Arielle Schwartz that is robust with some 200 practices and lectures and kind of guided support for your nervous system.
Yeah. Arielle, thank you so much for your time today. This has been incredibly helpful.
Thank you for having me.
What an incredible conversation. I know I will go back to that as a resource over and over again. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, be sure to follow Arielle and say thanks for being on the show. You can find links and all the things in the show notes at brokentobeloved.org. As a 501c3 nonprofit, our work is made possible by our generous donors. If this has been helpful to you, consider joining us today at the link in the show notes. Subscribe or follow the show to get new episodes automatically. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review or share with your friends. This episode was hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Lee. Editing by Heidi Kritz and post-production by Lisa Carnegas. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.